My friends, let me begin with a question. What happens when the economic failures of global capitalism collide with the political ambitions of nations in crisis? The answer, unfortunately, is written in the headlines we see today, headlines warning of a possible World War III in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, under Mohammed bin Salman and the wider Arab world, are sending a war warning that is shaking capitals across the globe. The Middle East has long been the fault line of global power struggles. It is not simply about religion, territory, or ancient rivalries. No, it is much more. It is about oil, about markets, about who controls the lifeblood of modern capitalism. And when those economic foundations tremble, wars become the language of the ruling classes. Saudi Arabia today, under MBS, faces enormous internal and external pressures. Economically, the nation has relied for decades on oil wealth to buy social stability at home and to secure loyalty abroad. But with the transition away from fossil fuels and with global demand shifting, the Saudi model is under stress. To distract from these tensions, leaders often turn to nationalism, militarism, and the promise of defense against external threats. The Arab world's warning of war must therefore be understood not only as a military threat, but also as an economic message. The elites in these countries are sending a signal. They will not tolerate being sidelined in a new geopolitical order. They are asserting their role, whether through alliances, through threats, or through actual military action. And here lies the tragedy. The peoples of the region, Palestinians, Israelis, Yemenis, Syrians, Iranians, Saudis, ordinary working people, are trapped in a cycle they did not create. They bear the bombs, the displacement, the shortages, while the wealthy elite continues to profit. War becomes a cover, a smokescreen for the failures of the capitalist system to provide jobs, security, and a dignified life for its people. The United States, let us be clear, is no innocent bystander. For decades, Washington has armed, funded, and directed conflicts in the Middle East to secure resources and protect corporate interests. Now, as Saudi Arabia and the broader Arab world issue their warnings, the U.S. finds itself caught between its strategic ally, Israel, and the growing anger of Arab nations. This is the classic contradiction of empire. You cannot serve all masters when their interests clash. So what does this mean for us? It means that unless we confront the root problem, the global capitalist system that drives nations into conflict for resources and power, we will be forced to watch history repeat itself. Another war, another generation sacrificed, while the wealthy retreat into their gated palaces and private jets. Saudi Arabia's latest war warning, issued under the leadership of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, represents far more than just a political statement in a tense moment. It is a signal of a larger geopolitical shift taking place in the Middle East, one that could redefine alliances, redraw battle lines, and test the balance of power between Arab nations, Israel, and the Western world. To understand why this moment is so dangerous, we must look beyond the headlines and ask a deeper question. What does it mean when the wealthiest and most influential Arab state declares its willingness to confront Israel and the West? The answer is unsettling. because it points to a region standing at the edge of historic transformation. For decades, Saudi Arabia played a carefully calculated role in world politics. It relied on oil wealth, on its strategic relationship with the United States, and on its influence across the Muslim and Arab world to maintain its place at the top of the regional hierarchy. The kingdom often spoke softly in public while working behind closed doors to protect its interests. But now, under Mohammed bin Salman, the tone has changed dramatically. Instead of cautious diplomacy, we are seeing bold declarations, open threats, and direct warnings. The message is unambiguous. Saudi Arabia will no longer remain silent in the face of Israel's military campaigns, nor will it accept a Middle East where Arab voices are ignored. This is not merely about defending Palestinian rights or responding to Israeli actions. At its core, this warning is about asserting leadership in a region long fractured by divisions. By raising the banner of confrontation, MBS is telling the world that Saudi Arabia intends to be the central force shaping the Arab response. And this in itself is a seismic change. For years, it was assumed that Saudi Arabia would quietly align with US and Israeli interests while focusing on its economic modernization plans. Instead, the war warning shatters that assumption and forces Washington, Tel Aviv, and even European capitals to confront a new reality. The Arab world may be preparing to move as one. The timing of this escalation is no accident. The global order is already fragile, with wars in Eastern Europe, tensions in Asia, and energy markets in turmoil. By positioning itself as the defender of Arab unity and the challenger to Israeli aggression, Saudi Arabia is seizing a unique opportunity to gain political leverage. If the Arab world does unite behind Riyadh's stance, it could alter not only the dynamics of the Middle East, but also the broader international balance of power. Imagine the impact on oil markets, on global trade routes, on military alliances. Imagine the panic in Western boardrooms and government offices if the flow of energy is disrupted or if new blocs emerge to counter Western dominance. These are not abstract possibilities. They are the very real consequences hinted at by the kingdom's sharp warning. And here is the hook. What we are witnessing is not just a political maneuver. It is the birth of a new contest for legitimacy in the Arab world. For decades, nations like Egypt, Iraq, and even Syria once claimed the mantle of Arab leadership. Today, that mantle is being claimed by Saudi Arabia, and MBS is using the language of war to do it. War warnings resonate in ways that quiet diplomacy never could. They stir emotions, mobilize populations, and project strength. They also force rivals, whether Israel, the US, or even Iran, to take notice. This is why the war warning matters. It is not an isolated outburst, but a calculated strategy to reshape perceptions of Saudi power. Critically, the kingdom's words are not falling on deaf ears. Across the Arab world, public anger at Israel's actions remains high. For millions of ordinary Arabs, Saudi Arabia's warning speaks to long-standing frustrations about occupation, inequality, and Western double standards. By giving voice to these grievances, MBS is not only strengthening his domestic position, but also binding together regional allies who might otherwise remain divided. This unity, even if temporary, gives the Arab world a louder voice on the global stage. It sends the unmistakable signal that the era of one-sided domination is being challenged. If history teaches us anything, it is that warnings of this kind cannot be dismissed. They often mark the opening act of larger conflicts, the smoke before the fire. Whether this moment leads to actual war or remains a high-stakes game of political theater, it already tells us one thing: the Middle East is no longer content to be managed by outsiders. Saudi Arabia's boldness shows that the region is preparing to write its own script, and the rest of the world may have no choice but to read it. Behind the loud warnings of war coming from the Arab world lies a quieter, but even more dangerous reality: economic collapse. The rhetoric of confrontation and military action is not happening in a vacuum. It is being fueled by deep structural crises within Arab economies, crises that leaders like Mohammed bin Salman are struggling to contain. When a nation cannot offer jobs to its youth, stability to its families, or security to its working class, it often turns outward, seeking enemies abroad to mask failures at home. This is the hidden engine behind the war drums we now hear across the Middle East. Consider the Saudi model itself. For decades, the kingdom's extraordinary oil revenues allowed it to buy stability. Subsidies, welfare programs, and generous government employment created a fragile social contract. The monarchy provided material comfort, and the population provided political silence. But that model is unraveling. Global energy markets are changing with new producers, renewable energy transitions, and fluctuating demand undermining Saudi Arabia's monopoly. The once steady river of oil wealth is no longer guaranteed, and the cracks are showing. High youth unemployment, rising inequality, and a growing demand for reform have placed immense pressure on the Saudi leadership. In this context, war rhetoric becomes more than strategy, it becomes survival. The hook here is that when economies fail, leaders reach for militarism as a distraction. We have seen this pattern time and again throughout history. Leaders who cannot deliver prosperity at home manufacture external threats to unify their populations. Instead of confronting the systemic failures of their economies, they redirect anger toward Israel, the West, or rival nations. In the short term, this can be politically effective. War talk stirs patriotism, silences dissent, and convinces citizens to accept sacrifices in the name of national defense. But in the long run, it is a dangerous game because it escalates real conflicts and risks, pulling millions into chaos they never chose. Saudi Arabia is not alone in this dynamic. Across the Arab world, economies are staggering under the weight of unemployment, debt, corruption, and declining resources. In countries like Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan, the economic situation is even more dire, with entire populations pushed to the edge by inflation and austerity measures. Leaders in these nations see Saudi Arabia's war warning not only as a political rallying cry, but also as an opportunity to shift public attention away from their own failures. By aligning with a bold external stance, they can mask the fact that they cannot provide bread, electricity, or jobs at home. War talk becomes a shield protecting fragile regimes from collapse. The economic collapse is not simply about numbers in a budget. It is about lived realities. Picture the young graduate in Riyadh, unable to find meaningful work despite years of study. Picture the family in Cairo struggling to afford food as prices skyrocket. Picture the workers in Lebanon watching their savings vanish as the currency crumbles. These are not isolated tragedies. They are the conditions in which militarism thrives. When people are desperate and angry, leaders can more easily direct them toward foreign enemies. The danger, of course, is that such manufactured anger can spill into real conflict, real violence, and real war. Here is another hook. The war drums beating in the Middle East are not only about territory or ideology, they are the echo of economic despair. Every missile threatened, every ultimatum issued, every fiery speech delivered is layered with the weight of economic collapse. And while leaders may believe they can control this strategy, history shows otherwise. Once unleashed, militarism has a way of spiraling beyond control, consuming nations in wars that devastate economies even further. What begins as a political distraction can end in total catastrophe. The global community must not ignore this economic dimension. Too often, analysts speak only of religion, culture, or security when discussing Middle Eastern conflicts. But the truth is more material wars are fueled by collapsing economies and the ruling elite's desperate attempts to cling to power. Saudi Arabia's warning of war, echoed across the Arab world, is as much a statement about economic weakness as it is about military strength. Leaders who cannot provide prosperity at home are turning to confrontation abroad as their last refuge. The warning signs are clear. If the economic foundations of Arab societies are not rebuilt, if youth unemployment remains rampant, if inequality deepens, if resources continue to be monopolized by the elite, then the drums of war will only grow louder. And with every beat, the world edges closer to a conflict whose true roots lie not in ancient rivalries, but in the collapse of modern economies that could no longer sustain their people. I leave you with this thought. Wars are not accidents. They are the predictable outcomes of a system built on inequality, exploitation, and competition. If the Arab world's warning turns into a full-scale war, it will not be because ordinary people wanted it. It will be because leaders failed to build economies that serve their citizens rather than their corporations. So let us not be fooled by the drumbeat of war. Let us demand instead that the resources of the Middle East, and indeed of the entire world, be used not for destruction, but for rebuilding lives, communities, and futures. Because unless we change course, the warning signs we see today may well become the darkest chapter of tomorrow.